Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. Last episode we looked at some amazing albums from a specific decade, that being the 80s. In this episode we are going to look at albums for a very specific year, and that year is 1979. Now 1979 might bring to mind things like disco, but it was a pivotal year for British post-punk. In the wake of the British punk explosion, many young musicians felt inspired to pick up instruments. By 1978, the first initial wave of punk had started to burn out. However, since punk had essentially burned standard rock music to the ground, the possibilities of what would come next were wide open. This environment nurtured a lot of creativity, and in the year 1979, so many amazing albums of unique music were produced in the United Kingdom. Let's look at another list. This is going to be Best British Post-Punk Albums of 1979. The first album we definitely have to have on the list is Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. This album, in my opinion, is one of the most pivotal albums in all of rock music. It created a J.G. Ballard-like soundtrack for the concrete post-industrial revolution Britain. The sound was created as much by the producer Martin Harnett as it was by the players in the band. He includes many effects in this sparse, echoey sound that kind of takes its cues from Can, Neu, and Bowie's Berlin trilogy, but the sound is one of a rundown factory and with an aggression of punk. The bass, guitar, and drums have a distance between them, but yet they are paradoxically cohesive. Both the vocals and lyrics of Ian Curtis exude a kind of melancholy that have much in common with Leonard Cohen as they do with William S. Burroughs. He would be the archetype for the angst-ridden frontman that we would see in the next 2 decades in alternative rock music. Highlight tracks include Day of the Lords, New Dawn Fades, She's Lost Control, Shadow Play, and I Remember Nothing. This is one of the best recorded rock albums of all time, and is one of my personal favorite records. Now, I had to include 2 albums by probably my favorite band of all time, The Fall. The band would release 2 albums in 1979, Live at the Witch Trials and Dragnet. Both of these albums really represent the band maturing way past the early sounds of things like Bingo Master's Breakout. Marky Smith realized his vision of combining his grotesque stream of consciousness rants over the sounds of a disjointed rockabilly band. The sound on these 2 albums are quite different. Martin Brama co-wrote the songs and brought a shimmering guitar sound on Live at the Witch Trials. Highlights include Frighten, Rebellious Jukebox, and 2 Steps Back. Brama would exit after this album, and the follow-up, Dragnet, would have a much more dark and dirgy sound, coming through with almost kind of a lo-fi production. Craig Scanlon would arrive on guitar and Stephen Handley was on bass, and these 2 stalwarts would have a long career with The Fall and were a pivotal part of the band's sound. Standout tracks here include Psychic Dancehall, A Figure Walks, and Before the Moon Falls. 1979 was the year where The Fall really started to forge the sound that would continue for several decades until Smith's passing in 2018. Both of these albums are worth checking out. The next album is an absolute masterpiece, and that is Wire's album 154. Over the course of 3 albums between 1977 and 1979, the band went from punk to a kind of postmodern avant-garde industrial synth prog pop. And this album is the zenith of that musical vision. The album is sparse and complex. They utilize synthesizers and studio effects to enhance the sounds of the 3 tight-piece musicians. Tracks like 2 People in a Room foreshadow the sound of Sonic Youth, while other tracks like A Touching Display show how guitars and synthesizers can be used to creating a forbidding atmosphere. But there are great pop melodies, like on the track Map Ref 41 Degrees North 93 Degrees West, which was apparently a guess at the location of the center part of the USA. This album is very unique and complex, but it's approachable and exemplifies the creativity that was happening in 1979 in the UK. Definitely gotta check it out. The next album is the debut album by the all-female band, the Raincoats. With a lineup that included guitar, bass, drums, and violin, the band has this chaotic sound that references all kinds of things, and it's kind of like an avant garage punk with nods to the Velvet Underground. The sound is strange and abrasive, yet melody here as well. If you want to see where the Riot Girls were taking their cues from, check out the Raincoats. They were a favorite of Kurt Cobain's, and highlight tracks on this album include Fairy Tale in the Supermarket, Adventures Close to Home, and You're a Million. Next album on our list is the sophomore album by Magazine, and that is Secondhand Daylight. Magazine was arguably the first post-punk band, and with their second album they created a dark, theatrical sound that strongly references pre-punk sounds of Roxy Music, Brian Eno, David Bowie, and even prog-ish stuff like Genesis and Pink Floyd. The band creates this post-punk prog stew using not only guitar, bass, and drums, but also keyboards and saxophone. Great tracks on this album include Feed the Enemy, Rhythm of Cruelty, and Back to Nature. This is a unique album that should be more widely known. The absolutely fantastic debut by Gang of Four, Entertainment, is next on our list. Gang of Four created a sound that would influence numerous bands in the indie and alternative rock world in the decades to come, including bands like Minutemen, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Fugazi, and Franz Ferdinand. The band used feedback and disjointed guitar sounds over tight syncopated bass and drum rhythms. The sound would be dubbed punk funk, a label the band hated. Lyrics were left-wing rants about society, which makes sense as they were named after Chinese revolutionaries. Highlight tracks on the album include Ether, Damaged Goods, I Found That Essence Rare, At Home He's a Tourist, and Love Like Anthrax. Definitely check out this album. The next album is John Lydon's finest musical moment, and that's Public Image Limited's Metal Box, also known as Second Edition. After helping to raise the rock world to the ground with his previous outfit, the Sex Pistols, Lydon wanted to incorporate the underground influences that he had listened to in the early 70s into his next band. On their sophomore effort, Metal Box, taking cues from both dub reggae and krautrock, the band stretches the boundaries of rock music with off-kilter rhythms, noise, repetitions, and vocals that challenge the conventions of rock melody. Lydon demands full attention from the listener and doesn't want music that can be simply hummed or be background noise. The sound on this album will be influential on noise and indie rock bands of the 80s and 90s. Players on the album, whether it is bassist Ja Wobble, guitarist Keith Levine, or the several drummers that played on this album, really occupy their own space in the recording. All the tracks stand out, but my favorites are Pop Tones, The Suit, and Swan Lake. On Swan Lake, Lydon wrestles with the painful memories of watching his mother pass away from cancer. This is one of the most important albums in the evolution of rock. A band that definitely could be seen as contemporaries of Pill are the Pop Group. Smashing together the rhythms of funk and reggae with the chaos of free jazz and avant-garde noise, the band would forge a crazy sound that would be hugely influential on bands like The Birthday Party and Scratch Acid. Their debut album, Why, would come out in 1979, and the opening track, She Is Beyond Good and Evil, would thrust the listener into the noisy world of funky chaos. Other great tracks include Thief of Fire, We Are Time, Savage Sea, Words Disobey Me, and Don't Call Me Pain. Put Captain Beefheart on the dance floor in a post-apocalyptic Britain, and you get close to the sound here, but maybe not. You really need to hear this band to get a sense of this very unique sound. The next album foreshadowed so much of the lo-fi sound of the 80s, 90s, and beyond, and that album is A Trip to Marineville by the band Swell Maps. The album is a strange journey that goes from straight-ahead garage punk to full-on noise to piano playing and all kinds of points in between. Many of the songs are 2 minutes and under, and some start out as one thing but eventually evolve into a kind of a chaos. Sonic Youth and Pavement would definitely take cues from this band. Standout tracks include HS Art, Don't Throw Ashtrays at Me, Midget Submarine, and Gunboats. This album is great fun and was way ahead of its time. For the last album on my list, I have to include the Soul LP by the Ruts, The Crack. In my opinion, this is one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Though the Ruts sound more straight ahead than probably the rest of the bands on this list, their sound was diverse enough to be included in the post-punk genre. If singer Malcolm Owen had not overdosed on heroin in 1980, the history of rock music might have turned out very differently. The Ruts created a sound that is firmly based in punk, but integrates the melody of pub rock and rock bands like Thin Lizzy and The Who, but they also delve into experimentation and incorporate Doug reggae and ska as well. The band was so good at creating anthems and riffs and muscular melodies, all these things that could be sung along to by a huge crowd. No song exemplifies this approach more than Babylon's Burning. Other amazing tracks on the album include SUS, Something That I Said, It Was Cold, Jawar, and Criminal Mind. This is a high energy album that has so many sing-along anthems, and it really should be much more widely known. So as you can see, 1979 was a great year for post-punk. do yourself a favor and check out all these albums. I'm well aware I did not put London Calling by The Clash on the list. I like that album, but not as much as the other ones on the list. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Do you like any of the albums on the list? If so, which ones? Thank you for watching.